So what we're thinking about today is how to organise a tower outing. We're going to try and break it down into a few different stages of organisation. I was chatting to a few ringing friends last night and mentioned that I was doing this training session. And they, one or two of them said, well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? You just book some towers and then go on the outing. And I agree. I think actually that's quite a good summary of this training session, really. But what we're going to try and do is break it down into a few more different sections of organisation. So it's starting from a complete beginner's perspective and working through the different things you might want to think about as part of organising a tower outing, and different things that, different considerations that you probably want to have a look at. So a few kind of basics, things that you will need. I'm going to, in this case, the demonstrations I'm going to do are based on the assumption that if you're on a Zoom training session, you've got access to the internet. So the first thing to need is access to Dove's guide for church bell ringers. As I say, we're going to look at using the website, but it is entirely possible, and this is the way it was done through most of ringing history, to organise an outing without the internet, just by using like the book version of Dove's guide. But access to Dove's guide, the ability to use a map to plan out a route around the different towers. That can be Google Maps or an OS map. Access to details of tower contacts, which can be found in tower association or guild handbooks, or usually on websites for associations, for different associations. And there's a link on the top right to the Central Council's list of affiliated societies, which then have the websites that you can use to get that information. And last but by no means at all least, something like the Good Beer Guide or the Good Pub Guide, or something along those lines, to be able to think a bit about where you might go for lunch. So those are the basic things you need. What we're going to do is go through this in 4 main stages of organisation. And stage 1 is to work out when you're going to go on your outing. You might want to think a bit about, well, if it's the summer, it'd be nice weather, but then people might be quite busy if it's the summer holidays, so maybe you want to do it at another time of year. Perhaps you want to do it in January or February when everyone's a bit miserable and wants cheering up, and so we go on a tower outing to give people things to do. But fixing a date, ideally a little while in advance. Now, this will depend a bit on how busy your ringers are, I think. So if you've got very busy bell ringers in your tower, or if it's a district outing or something like that, where you're hoping to get lots of people along, you'll want to do this stage quite early on and quite a way in advance. I tend to go for about 5 to 6 months in advance for our Bromley parish bell ringers tower outing. But if you were looking at a group of very busy ringers, or you're looking at something quite complicated like going abroad or going on a weekend or a week-long tour, then you'd probably want to go further in advance. And also, if you were looking for some quite rare or difficult to get towers, you'd want to go further in advance as well. So fix a date and invite some bell ringers along to your outing. And try to get, ideally, you want to have enough ringers to make this outing viable. So give them plenty of notice. That's stage 1. Before you go to stage 2, that is to say booking your towers and that sort of thing, you want to think a bit about what the priority is for your outing. So is it the case that you're mostly interested in the lunchtime pub and you want to focus the outing around that particular location? So you want your route to end up, for example, at this is the Tom Cobley Tavern in Sprayton, which is a regular Canberra pub of the year. You might be interested in numbers of bells or weight of bells. This is a photo from Exeter Cathedral with the 2nd heaviest ring of bells in the country. You might be interested in numbers of different bells or particular types of bells. Interesting and unusual towers might be the priority that you're interested in. You might be after amazing church architecture, in which case, rather than the Good Beer Guide, you might have your copy of Simon Jenkins' England's 1,000 Best Churches, or a copy of Pevsner for that county or something like that to help you plan your outing. Or you might be after nice scenery. You could be looking to link it in with some other event. You might want to be on an outing that then ends up, you can then go to a, I don't know, a folk festival or a food festival in the evening or something like that. So it's worth deciding at this stage what your priority is before you then start to think about which towers you're going to get, because that will sort of inform the planning that you're going to do. One sort of overriding priority, though, that I'd emphasize at this stage is that as the organizer, one of your big priorities, in fact, the big priority, should be trying to book towers which will enable your ringers to ring to the highest possible standard that they can. So if you've got a band which is a band of learners, then don't go to really, really heavy rings of bells or towers with lots of bells. Go to some towers where you think it's going to be a bit easier for them to produce really good ringing, for example. And so that's got to be the overriding priority. But within that, before we go on to stage 2, you'd think, well, what is it that I'm after? The pub, the architecture, the bells, the scenery. Sometimes it'll be possible to combine all of those. Okay, so stage 2 then is organising the towers. I've put and lunch as well, because when I organise outings, I think it's actually quite useful to book a pub for lunch and to pre-order lunch with the pub as well. If you don't do that, there is a tendency among ringers to slightly follow the crowd. And if one person says, oh, I'm going to this pub for lunch, then everyone goes to that pub. And you end up with a horde of hungry bell ringers descending on a pub that's had no warning of the arrival of these 16, 20, 24 ringers. And you've got to fit lunch in an hour and a half, and that won't work. So generally, I think it's best to try to book lunch in advance, but obviously that is a bit more complicated, takes up a bit more time. You don't have to do it. You can just be quite firm with people and say, look, we're not having lunch together. Go sort yourself out. This stage, you probably want to do 4 months in advance, 4 to 5 months, or start doing it at that sort of time. That's basically because, as we'll see, some towers will not be available, and so you'll have to replan and sort of make new arrangements. And so it's worth doing it with a bit of lead time, just in case. If you're, as I said, aiming to go somewhere with some quite rare and unusual towers, it'd be more likely that you'd want to start this process earlier. Let's now have a look at that sort of organising towers process in practice. So this is the schedule from our Bromley Parish outing last year. We had 3 towers in the morning. Each tower was about 45 minutes or so. Lunch with, hour and a half for lunch. It ended up actually, there was a bit more time than that because there's it's not actually half an hour from Gosden to Caterham. And then 3 towers in the afternoon. Last one a bit shorter so that we get back at a reasonable time. And a bit of variety of different types of towers, different weights of tenor, which is shown here. Different numbers of bells, 6s, 8s, and 5 at the end. So let's have a look at how we might go about making that happen. Okay, so I mentioned Dove's Guide for Church Bell Ringers, an amazing resource. This is available online at this link here. And basically, this is all of the towers in the world with ringing, bells suitable for change ringing. If we put in a random place, Romsey, which is where I learned to ring, it's in Hampshire, we can then get quite a lot of information about that tower. It tells us where it is, gives us a grid reference, gives us a postcode, gives us the weights of the bells, when they were cast, who cast them. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, and various other bits and pieces. And one of the things that's really useful, actually 2 really useful things, we've got some contact information or a website to go to, and we've got the ability to locate it using Google Maps. And then that brings up this wonderful map of that area with all of the towers near Romsey. So there's a ring of 10 over here at Abridge. There's a really nice ring of 8 at Sheffield English, ring of 6 at Lockerley, and so on. Here's one that I opened up earlier. So this is in the sort of Kent, Surrey, Sussex area. Might be familiar to some of you. We've got Sevenoaks up here. Gatwick Airport is over here. So just to sort of geographically anchor yourselves. So I chose this partly because it's relatively local to me, so I know some of these towers, but also because it's got quite a nice variety of different options. So we've got to sort of decide where we're going to go on an outing. And in this case, let's say I'm organising an outing for the Bromley Bellringers. I don't really want to travel that far from Bromley. Don't want people to have to get up too early in the morning. You might do. You might want to send them on a 3-hour trek down to the West Country, and that's fine. But on this occasion, I'm not aiming to send them too far away from home. And let's have a look at a few different options. So we can already sort of probably immediately pick out that we've got quite a nice line of settlement along this road here and near the M25. So we've got quite a bit of potential around here, perhaps, for this kind of line of towers. We've got some 6s, we've got some 8s. Limpsfield Chart is one of the towers we went to on our outing last year that was on that schedule I was showing you, and they're really rather good. Nice tailoring of 6. We've also got quite a nice little line of towers here. So Royal Tunbridge Wells through to Edenbridge. Edenbridge is supposed to be pretty good. Gillett and Johnston, ring of 8. So we can see that there. But we've also got some other options if we wanted to go a bit more unusual. We've got a 3 and a 4 and a 10 here. So if we've got a band capable of ringing on 10, we might want to go over to Bletchingley over there. If we've got a band capable of ringing on 12, we might want to come over here to East Grinstead. And so we've got quite a few different options that are available. We've got a nice concentration of 6s here if we want to focus on 6 bell ringing. So there's opportunity for some novelty. It's quite nice, I think, to include a sort of wild card novelty tower, a random ring of 3 or a ring of 5 or something like that. Last year we went to Coulsdon, which is a really old ring of 5 with some really old bells in it. Let's imagine we were going to do something around this line here. Now this is quite a nice area if anyone's ever been walking along the Eden Valley Way. It's a really nice area of countryside, and there's some quite interesting historic buildings like Hever Castle, Penshurst Place, that sort of thing around this area. So it's quite a nice place to have an outing. And we can see, let's imagine we start at Edenbridge, say. So what we can then do is we click on Edenbridge and go to more, and we get some more information about it. And we can scroll down and we can see, this is interesting. So we've got a ring of 8, all cast by the same founder, a good sign. Gillett and Johnston, that's a very good sign. 1911, that's a good time for Gillett and Johnston bells. These are probably going to be pretty nice bells to ring. So then we'd want to think a bit about, well, if we're going to Edenbridge, what sort of time would we have to leave Bromley if we were going from Bromley? So that would take us to get there by car 38 minutes or so. Okay, so if we were starting, say, at 10 o'clock for our first tower, that's nice and civilized. People wouldn't need to leave Bromley until about 9:10 or something like that. It's worth building in, when you're starting to think about distances, building in a bit of what I call faff time. Bell ringers like a good sort of faff around where they're, parking or taking their time, taking photos of the tower or that sort of thing, which is great. But allow a bit of time for people to get delayed, bad traffic, that sort of thing. So if we were starting at 10, we might advise people to leave a little after 9 o'clock, that sort of thing. Allow them time to park. So let's have a think about where we might go next. If we can get Edenbridge, that'd be good. Oops. And then we might want to go perhaps to this ring of 6 at Hever. Would perhaps be next on our list. And so we then think, okay, so we're at Edenbridge, we're going to Hever. How long will that take? Oh, that's very good. Only about 6 minutes to drive from Edenbridge to Hever. So we could probably get away with allowing about 15 minutes between leaving Edenbridge and starting at Hever. So say we had Edenbridge from 10 till 10:45, we might then think, okay, so we could then start at Hever at about 11 perhaps, okay? And so that's the sort of process that we'd be going through in terms of plotting out in our minds where we might go. And let's say we were going to do this line along here, Edenbridge, Hever, Chiddingston, Penshurst and Speldhurst. It's just a quick check of Chiddingston, and we'd see, well, that's interesting. So it's relatively big, 1,700 weight. So we'd want to think, well, have we got the band that will be capable of ringing there, or okay, and that sort of thing. And we might say, okay, so 3 towers in the morning's a good amount. Then we're going to want lunch, aren't we? So let's go back to Google Maps and just do a quite simple, quite straightforward pub. Okay, now they're all closed at the moment, sadly, but let's see. Yeah, there's quite a few options around here. So we've got one in Hever, we've got another one in Chiddingston, and then we might want to check those against things like the Good Pub Guide, perhaps, and have a look at that, and have a look at whether there are any particularly good pubs in that area, and so on. And so we'd have, after we've done all that, a bit of an idea about what we're going to do. So say these 3 towers in the morning, lunch in Chiddingston perhaps, and then 2 or 3 more towers in the afternoon. And once we plan that out, we're going to want to think about how we actually get those bells. Let's go back to Edenbridge for a moment. So all of these towers are in the Kent County Association. Fortuitously, I've got the Kent County Association website here ready to show you, but let's just have a quick look at this. So this is the Central Council's list of affiliated societies. If you use this, you can find any of the associations that you need. Dove tends to link from their website to the Central Council's list, like that. And then from that list, you go to the association in question. Once you're on that website, you can start to find some contact details. So for the Kent Association, you've got districts all listed here, or you just go to Association and to Towers and to A to Z list. And then in general, association websites will have a contact detail for the tower. That could be a range of different types of contacts. So it could be just a phone number, could be an email address, could be an email address without a phone number. It could be both. And if we scroll through, we'd find Edenbridge as our first tower. We'd see that there's, where are we? Here we are. We've got some contact details, an email and phone numbers, and we can make contact with those people from those towers. Now, at this stage, it's just worth emphasizing that it's an important skill, in addition to using Dove and using Google Maps and looking up a pub and that sort of thing. Quite an important thing for tower organizers is a good degree of common sense, patience, and diplomacy, because different towers will have different levels of contactability, and some towers they'll get back to you straight away. Other towers, it's going to be more complicated and difficult, and they won't necessarily reply straight away. Sometimes you won't ever hear back from somebody that you've contacted about ringing at a tower. And we just have to kind of accept that. That's part of the way things are, the rich tapestry of ringing and kind of move on. So let's just think about this line of towers again. We've got Edenbridge. Let's imagine that Hever came back to us and said, sorry, there's a service in the church that day, or there's something else going on, or the people at Hever Castle have complained about bells and we can't ring them, or something like that. If we'd booked Chiddingston for an hour and a bit later, we'd be slightly stuffed. We might be able to come down to Cowden and then up, but it's going to be quite tight with the driving. So it's worth thinking, well, let's just contact a couple of the towers first, maybe a morning one and then an afternoon one, once we've got our plan. See what they say. If they say yes, we can start to fill in some other towers. Maybe don't send all those requests out at once, because some of the towers might not get back to you, some of them might say no, and then you're going to have potentially some problems unless you've got a real concentration of towers to choose from in a particular area. So that's something worth emphasizing as well. So we choose our towers, we make contact with them using association websites or a guild or association handbook. We ask them if we can have bells really politely, see what they say. If they say no, we have a bit of a backup plan. Once we've got a good set of towers sorted, we then would perhaps look at getting the pub and phone up a particular pub, see if they could take a booking for however many ringers you're taking. This can be done a bit nearer the time than 4 or 5 months in advance, probably. And then I think it's worth pre-ordering for lunch as well, just because otherwise you can end up, as I say, everyone sort of demanding food all at once, and the pub can't necessarily cope with that. So that's a kind of tour of how we might go about organising the actual towers, using Dove, Google Maps to plan out the distances, and association websites to find out more about making contact with the particular towers. Okay, so that's that so far. Sorry, let's now go back to here and have a look at the next stage of organisation. So once we've got our towers and our lunch pub, we might write it up into a schedule. It's worth giving some location-related information for people's sat-navs or OS grid references if they've got an OS map with them. Giving some information, as I said, about the weights of the bells, the number of bells, that sort of thing. Some people can add other bits of information, some history of the church or some photographs of the tower. Information about parking is quite useful to help save time on the day. Giving a bit of a few hints about where to park as well. Okay, stage 3, we'd want to think about some outing-related administration in the couple of weeks before the outing. Pretty simple, really. So sending an order, pre-order to the pub, arranging transport, perhaps. Don't have to do this. You can just leave people to their own devices to organise themselves. But if you've got, a range of different types of people in your tower, and some young people who can't drive, that sort of thing, you'd want to perhaps think about organising them into groups for lifts. Little note on that: if you have got under 18s in your tower, you'd want to make sure that they're getting a lift with a few different types of people for child protection reasons as well, obviously. You might want to hire a minibus. You might have organised an outing that involves travelling by train. Some quite interesting potential itineraries there. You might have organised a cycling outing. You might have organised an outing where you can walk around the different towers. Not that easy. You need quite a density of towers in a fairly concentrated urban area to do that, unless you want to be hiking a lot between towers. But all those options are possible. In the early years of the 20th century, people went on outings in this form by, well, what's that? That's a charabanc. It's a charabanc, isn't it? So, yeah, a big car, effectively, and there's lots of stories of ringers getting stuck and having to walk 5 miles home because their transport broke down in the 1920s, that sort of thing. So, organising transport, perhaps, sending a pre-order to the pub, and finally, phoning round the tower contacts, to check that it's still okay to ring there. That's quite a useful thing to do, just to avoid any danger of being locked out on the day. Okay, on the actual day, there'll be a few different jobs to do. You're going to hope that the weather's beautiful and that everyone has a lovely time and enjoys themselves. To help make that happen, there's a few things that you'll want to do. Organise some people to run the ringing at each tower. Now remember, this is part of your kind of responsibility to try to ensure that the ringing is as good as it can be and of as high a quality as possible. So you'll want, a bit of a mixture of different people running towers, I think. So some people who've got a lot of experience of running towers, maybe a few people, one or two people who are doing it for the first time, and you can kind of mentor them through that process of running a tower. Perhaps they could watch somebody running a morning tower and then run one in the afternoon. Have a range of ages, have some men running towers, have some women running towers, have some of your young ringers, have some less young ringers running towers. So a range of different people is good, and giving people an opportunity perhaps to have a go at running a tower, but with some supervision to make sure that the ringing is as good a quality as possible. That means trying to make sure that people are ringing bells within their comfort zone. On an outing, it's not the same as a practice, really. You're wanting to be able to produce as good ringing as possible, and you're not really trying new things on an outing, I don't think, too much. So ringing within their comfort zone, ringing methods that are within their comfort zone, and that sort of thing, I think, is quite useful. So you'll want to arrange some people to run the towers. You might do that in the week leading up to the outing. On the day of the outing, you're going to want to be giving donations to the towers. Different towers might say how much they want. I think a couple of pounds a rope is quite a nice guideline. 15 to 20 pounds, I think, you'll be seen as being reasonable, but you might want to give more. I might be wrong on that. Perhaps you might want to give much more than that. It's worth having that organised in advance. So get some cash out, maybe from the tower account or from your own account or whatever. Get some cash out, put it in envelopes, and label them if you're feeling organised. And then you can give that to the tower contact when you meet them on the day. You'll be the one who's spoken to the tower contact, so it's worth, as the organiser, trying to get to each tower promptly. So maybe leave the previous tower when they're ringing down and go to the next tower, perhaps, if you can. Meet the tower contact, say hello, lovely to see you, nice to speak to you on the phone, that sort of thing. Give them the money, get access to the tower, find out about any important things you need to know about, like clock chiming mechanism, whether they want the bells left down at the end, those sorts of things, any bells that are particularly problematic, etc. So give them the donations, and then during the course of the day, make sure you collect that money back in from your ringers. If you want to, I guess, have a bit of a calculation about, okay, I've got this number of ringers, how much do I think is reasonable to ask them for an outing, and then from that, working out how much you can kind of afford to give the towers. So collecting money from the ringers and giving money to the towers, ideally money that you've counted out and worked out in advance if you can. Another point about the day of the outing, it's just worth saying, try to expect the unexpected. Things can go wrong on an outing. You might have a broken stay, for example. You might get to a tower and find that you start ringing and one of the ropes falls off. All sorts of things could happen in the tower. You might not get into the tower. You might have what's called a lockout, where the tower contact doesn't turn up. Hopefully, if you've phoned them in advance a week or so before, this shouldn't happen. But if it does, it's worth having with you a list of tower contact numbers so that you can phone that person up, because people do forget things and they might have simply forgotten to let you in, and hopefully they'll live nearby and they'll come and let you in and you can ring. If not, you just need to kind of take that on the chin and say, right, let's sit out here in the sunshine, hopefully it's not raining, and then go to the next tower when you can. You might have a set of handbells with you to ring in the event of a lockout. Or you might, as happened on the Bromley Parish outing in 2018, a couple of people on this training session I think might have been on that outing and will remember this, you might start ringing only to be interrupted by irate Morris dancers. We were in Whitstable, and it happened to be the Whitstable Oyster Festival that weekend. And we started ringing at the tower in the middle of Whitstable, the Ring of Eight, only to be interrupted by somebody shouting up that because of our ringing, the Morris dancers couldn't hear the instructions for their Morris dancing, and they were doing a public display with the approval of the vicar, who I think had forgotten that ringing of bells and Morris dancing in the churchyard were not necessarily compatible. This is another occasion where tact and diplomacy and politeness came into play, and we came to an arrangement where we would ring one thing while they sort of sat around. We would stop. They would do one of their Morris dances. When they'd finished that, we'd do another piece of ringing. So be prepared for unusual and unexpected things to happen. You could be interrupted by Morris dancers, potentially. So that's just another thing about on the day of the outing. Be prepared for things potentially to not go the way you've planned them. Even the best planned outings can have, as we've seen, odd things happening to cause problems. So just a quick kind of overview of some of the things we've talked about and some tips for organising an outing. When you're organising the towers, try to have some backup plans in case any particular tower on your plan isn't available. So don't put all your eggs in one basket and ask for all those towers at once. Try to have a variety of different towers. So you might want a novelty ring of 3. You might want a couple of 6s, a ring of 8, that sort of thing, a few rings of 8. But try to make sure that those towers are ones that are suitable for your band so that you can have the best ringing possible. Don't go through a ring of 12 with a group of ringers who've never rung on 12 before, for example. Try to have information that will help people get around the itinerary, ask about parking, that sort of thing. If you're going to a pub for lunch, send a pre-order and make sure you take a list of phone numbers for the tower contacts, along with things like all the tower donation money and that sort of thing. A list of phone numbers for the tower contacts in case of a lockout. I hope that's been helpful. I'll now take any questions that people